I never thought I'd be lying in my own bed, wide awake, pretending to be asleep, just so my roommate wouldn't notice. I heard him creep in at 2 a.m. Honestly, it sounds way creepier than it was. Or maybe it doesn't, but I swear I'm not making it weird on purpose. It just happened, and I still can't fully process it. So here's the setup. I'm sharing this tiny 2-bedroom apartment with Mark, my roommate from college. We've been living together for about 8 months now, mostly because rent in the city is a nightmare, and splitting it made life way more manageable. Mark's the kind of guy who's super chill, the type who's usually out by 11, and honestly, sometimes I barely notice he's around. He's a graphic designer, kind of artsy but low-key, and if I'm honest, he's also the most handsome guy I've ever lived with. Like, not in a creepy way. Well, maybe a little. But it's one of those things where you just don't say stuff because it makes things awkward. Anyway, last night was just supposed to be a normal night. I'd finished a late shift at the bookstore, got home around midnight, and crashed immediately. I was wiped out. Mark was out somewhere. He usually goes to this local jazz bar on Thursdays, and I thought he was gone for good. At least, that's what I hoped, because I was ready for some serious peace and quiet. But at 2 a.m., I hear the door open. I'm half asleep, but I catch the sound of his footsteps. Soft, careful, like he's trying not to wake me. I figured he was just passing through, or maybe grabbing a glass of water. No big deal. Then, out of nowhere, I feel a hand on my arm. Not like a tap or a poke. More like a gentle, hesitant touch. My heart immediately races, but I'm frozen. I don't want to know why he's touching me. I just want him to think I'm asleep and leave it at that. So I stay perfectly still, pretending to be out cold. The thing is, Mark's always been easygoing, never the type to invade someone's space. But that night, the way he touched me, it felt different. Like he was trying not to scare me, but also couldn't stop himself from reaching out. And there I was, caught between confusion and this weird, unexpected sensation. I wanted to say something, ask him what the hell was going on, but I was too scared to break the silence. Plus, if I opened my eyes and he saw me awake, maybe it would all get awkward or worse. So I just lay there, heart pounding, wondering if I should say something the next day or pretend it never happened at all. That's where I'm at now, still lying in bed, replaying those few seconds over and over, trying to figure out what it means. Was it just a sleeping mistake? Or is there something more going on with Mark that I never saw coming? I guess I'll find out soon enough, but honestly, I'm not sure if I'm ready for whatever's next. Morning came with that weird kind of heaviness, like the air itself knew something was off. I'd barely slept, tossing and turning, trying to decide if I should bring up what happened or just let it slide. By the time Mark shuffled in for breakfast, I was pretty sure I looked like a zombie who'd just survived a night in a haunted house. He was completely oblivious, humming to himself in the kitchen, and I felt this pang of guilt for making a big deal out of something that might have just been a weird accident. I mean, maybe he was half asleep and didn't realize what he was doing, or maybe he was just being, I don't know, human? But the way his hand had felt on my arm was still buzzing in my mind, and I couldn't stop thinking about whether he'd felt it too. "Morning, man," he said, pouring himself some coffee. "You look like hell." "Rough night?" I shrugged, trying to sound casual, even though I probably looked like I was about to break down. "Nah, just tired from work." He glanced at me, eyebrows raised, and for a second, it felt like he was about to say something else. But then he caught himself. "You want to grab lunch later? I found this new taco place that's supposed to be amazing." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say yes, just to keep things normal, but another part was scared that if I spent more time with him, that weird moment from last night might explode into something neither of us was ready for. Sure, I finally said, "Sounds good." The day dragged on. I couldn't focus at work, and every time my phone buzzed, I half expected it to be him texting about last night. But nothing, just the usual spam emails and notifications. When lunchtime rolled around, I met him outside the taco place, and he looked different. Not in a dramatic way, but softer, like maybe he'd been thinking about last night too. Or maybe it was just the lighting, or my mind playing tricks. We ordered, sat down at this small table outside, and for a while, we just ate in silence. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "Hey, about last night." My heart skipped, and I braced myself. Was he going to make it awkward? Apologize? Confess something? Instead, he laughed nervously and said, "Sorry if I woke you. I guess I'm not as sneaky as I thought." I blinked, relief flooding through me. "It's fine. I was just tired." But then he looked at me, really looked, and said, "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something, but I wasn't sure how to say it." Now I'm sitting there, taco half forgotten, wondering if this is the moment everything changes, or if it's just going to be another weird roommate story. He took a deep breath. "I guess I've been feeling kinda weird around you lately. Like, I don't know, more than just roommates. And last night, I think I wanted to see if maybe you felt the same. But I chickened out." I stared at him, heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I never thought Mark felt that way. In college, we were just friends who happened to share an apartment, nothing beyond that. "Mark, I started," but he held up a hand. "Wait, don't say anything if you don't want to. I just thought you should know, and if you don't feel the same, I promise it won't make things weird between us. I value this friendship too much." I took a moment, trying to sort through the mess of emotions swirling inside me. There was surprise, definitely, then relief, because I wasn't alone in feeling something, and maybe, just maybe, a little hope. "Honestly," I said slowly, "I've been thinking about you a lot too. I just didn't know how to say it. I thought maybe you were out of my league." He laughed, that easy, genuine laugh that I'd always liked but never really noticed until now. "Same," he admitted, "but maybe it's not about leagues. Maybe it's just about being honest." The rest of lunch passed in a blur of nervous smiles and awkward glances, but it felt good. Real. Like we'd crossed some invisible line that had been between us for months. That night, we sat in the living room, the tension still there but softer, more bearable. He reached over and brushed my hand, this time without hesitation, and I didn't pretend to be asleep. Because, honestly, I didn't want to miss a moment of this anymore. After that night in the living room, things between Mark and me shifted quietly, like the way the air changes just before a storm. It wasn't like we had some big romantic explosion. No dramatic declarations or awkward confrontations, just a new kind of closeness that neither of us seemed in a rush to define. We still kept to our routines, but there was this undercurrent now. Little glances, touches that lingered just a second longer, or casual jokes with a double meaning. It felt like we were both testing the waters without really saying anything outright. Honestly, it was both exciting and terrifying. One evening, a few days later, we found ourselves on the couch after a long day, sitting so close that our legs were touching. I was half watching some random documentary, but mostly I was watching him. The way his eyes caught the light when he laughed, how his hair fell over his forehead just so. It was like I was seeing him in high definition for the first time. Then he turned to me and said, "You ever think about how weird it is that we've lived together all this time and never really talked about, well, this?" I swallowed hard, feeling that familiar flutter in my chest. "Yeah, it's like we were both waiting for the other person to make a move, or maybe just waiting for the right time." He nodded, his fingers brushing against mine almost accidentally, but neither of us pulled away. "What if there isn't a right time? What if we just have to make it up as we go?" I smiled because, honestly, that felt like the truth. Life was messy, and sometimes you just had to jump in without a perfect plan. "Then I guess we're both screwed," I joked, trying to keep the mood light. Mark laughed, this time with real warmth, and leaned his head against my shoulder. "Yeah, but maybe that's not so bad." That night, I realized something important. Whatever this was between us, it wasn't just about attraction or curiosity anymore. It was about trust. About finally letting someone in after pretending for so long that I didn't want more. The next few weeks were a blur of new experiences and awkward firsts. Our first real date at that taco place turned into late-night walks through the city, grabbing coffee at stupidly early hours, and learning about each other's quirks and secrets. I found out Mark was terrified of spiders, which was hilarious because he always acted so calm, and he learned that I had an embarrassing obsession with cheesy 80s movies. One night, after a particularly bad storm, we ended up stuck in the apartment because the train stopped running. We ordered takeout, drank way too much cheap wine, and ended up sprawled on the floor, trading stories about our worst dating disasters. It felt like the kind of night that should be in a movie, but it was just us. Imperfect, a little messy, but real. At some point, Mark looked at me with that soft expression he had when he was serious and said, "I'm glad you pretended to be asleep that night." I laughed, shaking my head. "Yeah, me too. I was terrified you were going to freak me out or something." "Maybe I was a little freaked out," he admitted, "but I'm glad I didn't back away." That was the moment I knew things were changing for good. Not just us, but how I saw myself and what I wanted. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Still, it wasn't all smooth sailing. We both had our doubts and fears. Sometimes I'd catch myself wondering if I was just imagining things, or if I was fooling myself into thinking this could work. Mark was dealing with his own stuff too. Old relationships, the pressure of his job, and the fear of messing things up between us. One afternoon, I came home to find him sitting on the couch, staring at his phone with this troubled look. I sat next to him and asked what was up. He sighed. "It's just complicated. My ex texted me out of the blue, said she wants to talk, and now I'm stuck wondering if I made a mistake." I could see how much it hurt him, how tangled the past still was. I reached over and squeezed his hand. "Hey, whatever happens, I'm here. We don't have to figure it all out right now." He looked at me, eyes searching, and nodded. "Thanks. I don't want to lose what we have." "Neither do I," said quietly. That moment felt both fragile and strong, the kind of thing that could either break us or make us stronger. And honestly, I wasn't sure which way it would go. But I knew one thing. I was willing to fight for it. Life with Mark wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And for the first time, pretending wasn't part of the plan. In the days that followed, the ex situation hovered over us like this unspoken cloud. Mark tried to brush it off, saying he'd already told her he wasn't interested in revisiting the past. But I could see the tension in his shoulders, and the way his smile sometimes fell a little flat. I didn't want to push him. That felt like one of those silent boundaries in new relationships where you have to figure out where the other person's comfortable. Still, part of me wondered if I was just a rebound or a distraction. One night, after a long day at work, I came home to find Mark sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at his laptop. The light from the screen cast shadows across his face, making him look older, worn down in a way I hadn't seen before. "Hey," I said, dropping my bag on the floor. He looked up, managing a small smile. "Hey," I pulled out a chair and sat across from him. "Want to talk about it?" He hesitated, biting his lip, then shook his head. "Not tonight," I nodded, not wanting to pry. Instead, I leaned back and just watched him for a bit. There was something vulnerable in that moment, a quiet I hadn't seen before. I wanted to reach out, to tell him it was okay to feel messy, to not have it all figured out. But the words got stuck somewhere between my chest and my throat. Later that night, we both ended up in the living room, the glow from the city lights outside casting this soft hue over everything. Mark was curled up on the couch, and I sat close enough that our arms were touching. Neither of us said much, but the silence was comfortable, a kind of shared presence that felt like its own kind of conversation. Then, out of nowhere, he reached for my hand. It was tentative, like he wasn't sure if I'd pull away, but I didn't. In fact, I squeezed his fingers gently. "Thanks for being here," he whispered. I smiled, feeling the warmth spread through me. Always. That small moment was like a lifeline, reminding me that even when things were complicated or uncertain, we had something real. A few days later, Mark finally told me he'd blocked his ex on all platforms. I could tell it was a relief, but also a weight lifted from his shoulders. For the first time in a while, it felt like the past wasn't dragging us down. We celebrated by going out to that little jazz bar he liked. Sitting there, watching him relax into the music, I realized how much I wanted to be part of his world, not just as a roommate or a fling, but as something more permanent. We talked more openly that night, about what we wanted, about fears, about hopes. I told him I was scared too, scared of getting hurt, scared of losing something good, because I couldn't handle the vulnerability. But I also told him I was ready to try. He nodded, eyes shining in the dim light. Me too. After that, things started to feel different. Not perfect, but hopeful. We began spending more time together, not just around the apartment, but out in the city, exploring little neighborhoods, trying new food, and sometimes just wandering without a plan. One lazy Sunday, we cooked dinner together, Mark handling the pasta, me chopping veggies. There was laughter, some playful teasing, and a million tiny moments where I caught myself thinking, this is what normal looks like. When we finally sat down to eat, Mark reached out and took my hand across the table. "I'm really glad we did this," he said softly. "Me too," I replied. That night, as we stood in the kitchen cleaning up, he pulled me close. Our faces were inches apart and I could feel the heat from his breath. It was the kind of moment you read about but never expect to live. A soft, slow kind of everything. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, voice barely above a whisper. I wrapped my arms around him, feeling like for the first time, this place, this apartment, this city, this life was home. Of course, things weren't perfect. There were still tough conversations, days when doubt crept in, and moments when past fears bubbled to the surface. But we faced them together, awkwardly and imperfectly, learning as we went. One night, as we lay tangled up in bed, Mark said, pretending to be asleep was probably the weirdest start to something so real. I laughed, nuzzling him. "Yeah, but maybe it was exactly what we needed." He smiled, eyes closing, and I felt this deep, quiet peace settle around us. No more pretending, no more hiding, just us, trying to figure it out. Together. The morning light filtered softly through the blinds, casting stripes across the rumpled sheets where Mark and I lay tangled together. For a moment, everything was just quiet and warm, the kind of peace I hadn't realized I'd been craving until I had it right there beside me. I reached out, fingers tracing the line of his jaw, and he opened his eyes, meeting mine with that familiar, easy smile. "Good morning," he said, voice still thick with sleep. "Morning," I replied, feeling a little shy even though we'd been doing this for weeks now, waking up together, sharing breakfasts, stealing those lazy moments before the world demanded we be anywhere else. It's strange how something so simple can feel monumental when it's with the right person. I never thought I'd say this about a roommate, but Mark had become everything I didn't know I needed. That day, we decided to hit up the park nearby. The city was waking up, people jogging, walking dogs, and the air had that fresh, hopeful smell of early spring. We grabbed coffee from our usual spot and strolled through the trails, talking about everything and nothing. At one point, Mark stopped and pulled me into a quiet corner surrounded by blooming cherry blossoms. He looked nervous, like he was about to say something important but wasn't sure how. "Hey," I said, giving his hand a reassuring squeeze. He took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about how fast things have moved and how new this all still feels." I nodded. "Yeah, same. It's been a lot to process. Do you ever worry it's too soon? That maybe we're rushing into something because it feels good now, but it might not last?" Honestly, I did. I was terrified of losing the friendship we'd built, scared that if things didn't work out, we'd have nothing. But I also knew that what I felt wasn't just a fleeting crush. It was deeper. I worry about that too, I admitted. But I also think if we don't take risks, we might miss something real, something worth it. He smiled, and there was this spark in his eyes that made my chest tighten. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," I said with a laugh. "But maybe if it was, it wouldn't be as meaningful." We stood there for a while, just holding hands under the cherry blossoms, the soft petals drifting around us like something out of a movie. And in that quiet moment, I knew I wanted to keep trying, to keep building this fragile, beautiful thing between us. Back at the apartment, the days turned into weeks, and with every conversation, every touch, every shared look, the walls I'd built around my heart started to crumble. Mark was patient, kind, and somehow managed to make me feel seen, even when I was at my most guarded. One evening, I found us on the roof, wrapped in blankets and staring up at the stars. The city buzzed below, but up here, it felt like the world had paused just for us. "I'm glad you didn't freak out when you touched my arm that night," I said quietly. He chuckled. "You mean when you pretended to be asleep?" "Yeah, that was weird. But honestly, I was nervous as hell." "Me too," I admitted. He shifted closer, resting his head on my shoulder. I was scared I'd ruin everything. "You didn't," I said, turning my head to meet his eyes. "You made everything better." He smiled, those dimples popping up, and for a moment, the rest of the world disappeared. It was just us, two guys who took a chance on something uncertain but real. But life isn't all perfect moments. There were still rough days. Days when past wounds crept back up, or when the pressure of work and expectations weighed heavy. One afternoon, I came home to find Mark pacing, frustration written all over his face. "What's going on?" I asked, sitting beside him. He ran a hand through his hair. "My boss is on my case about this new project, and I'm just overwhelmed. I'm afraid I'm not good enough." I pulled him into a hug. "Hey, you're one of the most talented people I know. You've got this," he sighed, resting his head against my chest. "Thanks. Sometimes I forget I'm not alone." "You're never alone," I promised. Those moments, the highs and the lows, were becoming our new normal. It wasn't always easy, but it was real, and that made all the difference. One night, after a late shift, I came home to find Mark waiting with a bottle of wine and that mischievous grin I'd come to love. "Thought we could celebrate making it through the week," he said. We poured glasses and settled on the couch, the city lights twinkling through the windows. As the wine loosened our words, the conversation turned deeper about fears, dreams, and what we wanted from life. At one point, he looked at me, eyes serious but soft. "I want us to be more than just roommates who fell into this. I want us to be partners." My heart pounded. "I want that too." He grinned, that spark lighting up his face. "So, what do we do now?" I shrugged, smiling back. "We figure it out. Together." And that's exactly what we did. One imperfect, beautiful day at a time. After that night on the couch, when Mark said he wanted us to be partners, everything felt like it was shifting on a whole new level. Not because we hadn't been close before, but because now there was this unspoken promise hanging between us, a kind of open-ended question about what together might actually mean. For a while, though, we didn't rush into anything official. We kept it casual, like testing the waters without diving in head first. Maybe it was because both of us had been burned before, or maybe it was just that cautious part of me that still wasn't sure if this was real or some kind of daydream. One Saturday afternoon, we ended up at this tiny bookstore downtown. It was one of those places that smelled like old paper and coffee, with stacks of books spilling out onto the sidewalk whenever the weather was good. Mark was browsing graphic novels while I wandered over to the poetry section. He caught my eye from across the room and grinned. "Hey, do you want to grab a drink after this? There's a new bar that just opened nearby." I smiled back, feeling that familiar flutter in my stomach. "Yeah, I'd like that." We spent the next couple of hours wandering through aisles, swapping book recommendations, and just enjoying the kind of easy, comfortable silence that only happens when you're with someone who gets you. At the bar, the lights were dim, the music a low hum beneath our conversation. We settled into a corner booth, ordering a couple of Tool Tales, and for the first time, the word boyfriend slipped between us, not as a big announcement, but as a quiet acknowledgement. "So," Mark said, swirling his drink, "is this officially us now?" I laughed, shaking my head. "I don't know. Does it matter what we call it?" He shrugged, but there was a softness in his eyes. "Not really. As long as it's us." That kind of simplicity, that shared understanding, felt like the best kind of foundation. We didn't need labels to know where we stood. Back at the apartment, things settled into a rhythm that felt natural. We cooked dinner together on weeknights, had lazy mornings wrapped in blankets, and spent weekends exploring the city or just binge-watching shows we both pretended not to like. One evening, after a long, exhausting day, I found Mark sitting on the floor of the living room, headphones on, doodling in his sketchbook. I dropped down beside him, exhausted but happy to be there. "Rough day?" he asked without looking up. "You could say that," I replied. "But honestly, being here with you makes it better." He smiled, finally lifting his gaze. "Same here. That night, we talked about dreams, Not the big, life-changing ones, but the small stuff. Places we wanted to visit, things we wanted to try. It felt like for the first time, we were making plans not just for the next week or next month, but for whatever came after. But life, as it tends to do, threw a curveball. Mark got an incredible opportunity, a job offer in another city, farther away than either of us had expected. It was the kind of chance he'd been working toward for years, and I was proud of him. But it also meant we had to face the reality of what that meant for us. When he told me, we sat in silence for a long time, both of us trying to process the weight of it. "I don't want to lose this," I finally said, voice barely above a whisper. "Neither do I," he replied, taking my hand. "But maybe this is just another test. Maybe if it's real, we'll find a way." We spent the next few weeks talking about what a long-distance thing might look like, about visits, calls, and the kind of trust we'd need. It wasn't easy, and the uncertainty gnawed at both of us. The night before he was set to leave, we stayed up late, wrapped in each other's arms, neither wanting to say goodbye. "Promise me something?" he said. "Anything. That no matter what happens, we keep this, us, even if it's hard." I nodded, tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. "I promise." Watching him walk out the door the next morning, suitcase in hand, was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But it also made me realize how much he'd come to mean to me. The first few weeks apart were brutal. Texts and calls helped, but they couldn't replace the comfort of his presence. I found myself missing the little things, the way he laughed, the way he'd reach for my hand when he thought no one was looking. But we kept at it, holding on to the hope that we were building something stronger than distance. And slowly, in the quiet spaces between the chaos, I started to understand that this, whatever it was, whatever it became, was worth fighting for. Because sometimes, love doesn't come with fireworks or perfect timing. Sometimes, it comes in the form of a roommate touching your arm at 2 a.m., and both of you pretending to be brave enough to say what's really on your hearts. Months passed, and though the miles stretched between us like a stubborn wall, Mark and I found ways to bridge the distance. Weekend visits became our lifelines. Short, intense bursts of togetherness that made the waiting feel a little easier. We learned to cherish the small moments. Shared coffee in the early morning, walks through familiar streets, that quiet understanding in a glance. One chilly evening, not long after one of his visits, I was sitting by the window, watching the city lights flicker to life. My phone buzzed. A message from Mark. Simple words. "Can't wait to see you." That text carried so much weight, all the hope and commitment bundled into those 4 words. And I realized this wasn't just about surviving the distance. It was about building something real, something lasting. When he finally moved back, the decision wasn't just about geography. It was about choosing us, even with all the uncertainty that life throws our way. We made no grand promises, no flashy declarations. Instead, we settled into the everyday. The shared dinners, the lazy Sunday mornings, the quiet evenings where sometimes words weren't needed at all. One night, as we lay tangled up on the couch, Mark turned to me and said, "Thanks for pretending to be asleep that night. If you hadn't, I don't know if we'd be here." I smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the room's heater. Sometimes the scariest moments lead to the best things. And in that moment, I understood that love isn't about perfect timing or flawless beginnings. It's about the courage to be vulnerable, to take chances, and to hold on, even when you're not sure where the path will lead. So here we are, still figuring it out, still learning how to show up for each other every day. And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way.